Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. Well, welcome to 2021, which has been kind of a mess so far. I was going to put on clothes, but I'm at the stage of pregnancy where, like, nothing really fits, and I don't really want to look at myself anyway. I think that very little is going to go on my grid during this time of my life. If I could just not be on camera ever, that would be like ideal. But vanity aside, I think it's also not just pregnancy, it's that we've been on lockdown for almost a year. So I haven't had my eyebrows done since well before last March, because the first thing that was canceled for me was my eyebrow appointment, followed by a bunch of plane flights. And I haven't had a haircut in probably over a year and a half. The other day I came into Mr. Blake watching a YouTube video called How to Cut My Wife's Hair, which was great. He did an okay job, but like, how fancy could we really get here? So I was gonna put on clothes, and then I looked at myself and I was like, I can't do it. I just don't have it in me. Baby's moving. That happens now. It's interesting. These are my Christmas pajamas. My mommy gave them to me. So yeah. I am working on my next YA manuscript, which is going okay considering how weird the world is. I actually I'm kind of like, I've really gotten that like 2 hours at a time. Like, I can focus for 2 hours at a time. And then I take, sort of like a 2-hour break, and then we're back to another 2 hours. So things are happening. Unfortunately, I thought I was going to be able to do more things. Like I mentioned that I was doing a persuasion adaptation, but I think that project is going to have to be tabled. I still would like to get it done. I'd like to write as much as humanly possible before I have to take care of an infant. But this month is so hectic. I think I'm going to be able, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't know if you guys are like, you don't have to put any of this in your planners. I think I'm going to be able to finish this manuscript by the first week of next month. But I also have a couple of other things I need to do. My Which Way magazine deadline, as usual, you don't need to know about this other than my story Toxic is currently running in Which Way magazine, which is about a girl who's kind of fed up with internet dating, and she has met a demon. Well, he's only a demon at night. During the day, he's kind of like, he's kind of a himbo. He's not like as good as a himbo though. He just more irritates her. And then at night, he's this very cultured, enjoyable demon. And it's sort of a parody of the hazards of dating. That's what's running right now. It's called Toxic. It's also very much about her roommates who are in their own forms of toxic relationships. And yeah, and so I have that. I also usually release something on my birthday, January 31st. Usually it's a book, but because I'm still going to have to figure out how I'm going to balance traditional publishing with self-publishing, which I will still do, the Atlas 6 will continue. It's just a matter of when I'll be able to devote resources to that, because I can't interfere with my young adult book, the marketing of that. And so it's a little bit touch and go as far as how I'm going to be able to release, sort of older projects that I was in the middle of, which, like, of course this is when this happens. But yeah, so I can't release a book, but I will be releasing something on AO3. It will be fan fiction. It will not be Harry Potter. I am not going to tell you yet because I'm a messy bench who lives for drama, and because I don't want to tell you something before I can guarantee that it will happen. But I'm thinking it's going to be 3 to 4 short stories. I think it's going to be supernaturally, not the show. Like, I've actually never seen the show, and let's not get started on that. But yeah, I'll tell you in a bit. I don't think you're going to be too surprised by what it ends up being. Let's move on. This month's spell book is My Brilliant Friend, which is not my favorite book. I think essentially, Elena Ferrante has said that all 4 of the novels are basically one book that's split up into 4 because otherwise it would be an enormous book, and that is my favorite book. I've always wanted to include her work in S.P.E.L.L, but I mean, honestly, do I think that this is the best work for it? Not really. It's about womanhood, yes, not necessarily in a sex-positive way. I think that some of her other books have been much more interesting glimpses at sexuality, you know, where this is more like the story of a life. But I also don't think that, like, I think that if you had never read Elena Ferrante before and I threw The Lying Life of Adults at you or Days of Abandonment, I think you'd be like, I don't really get this. She just writes these really extreme female emotions, kind of like the uglier side of being a woman, the envy and the inadequacy and the visceral craving for love or acceptance or sex. And I think that it is easiest to sort of fall in love with her work if we start here. So that's why we're starting here. It's my birthday month. I can do whatever I want. I've already talked so much. Okay, we have so many things to cover too. Here we go. Hi, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to ask you some thoughts about something personal. Your videos help me a lot. Good, I'm glad. And make me feel like you're my big sister, as I never had one. Well, good, I'm glad you feel that way. For the record, my siblings never asked me for advice. They did get me a selfie stick though. I've struggled with low self-esteem and insecurities all my life. I hated sharing as a child. Now I have many close friends and I got into a romantic relationship 5 years ago, but I find myself struggling with emotions of jealousy and possessiveness sometimes. Can you talk about these emotions and how they're viewed? So I think we've talked before about how envy is a quality that starts from childhood. If your parents or whoever you're close to, is, you know, in your formative years, frequently compare you to someone else. So you don't have an older sister, but if there's someone in your life or just anyone in your life that your parents were constantly comparing you to, maybe even themselves, that makes it so that you are constantly comparing yourself to others, which is why you might have this feeling like things could get taken away from you. It's this sort of lack of safety. You know, it's just this lack of feeling like you as you are enough. And that's already a really hard thing to feel. It's already really hard to accept yourself. Everybody struggles with that. I think that issues of envy, and I agree that there is a distinction between envy and possessiveness, because envy is like, I want what other people have. Possessiveness is, this is what I have and you cannot take it away from me. I understand possessiveness a lot, and I think that it's rooted in a fear that like we were talking about, this fear that something is going to get taken from you. And then obviously this is really damaging to pretty much any kind of relationship you could have, because most people don't want to feel like they're in some sort of cage of being only your friend or being only your significant other and not being allowed to have a life outside of that. There's obviously lots of really unhealthy things that might go on there. But the fact that you're thinking about this is great. The fact that you're aware of it is already a huge first step, because I think most people who are really toxically jealous or toxically possessive will never acknowledge that to themselves. So congratulations, you are already not toxic because you're thinking about it and trying to do something about it. And I think it has to start with being aware that you feel this way not because of something that other people are doing or that you're not getting from someone. It might be, but I think that it really starts with what you feel about yourself. Until you love yourself, like yourself, accept yourself, whatever you can manage to feel about yourself that is positive is necessary in order for you to have relationships with other people. Because if you don't understand why people love you or what you bring to your relationships, then of course you'll always be afraid that they'll leave you because you don't really understand why they're there to begin with. And I think that, you know, to some degree, there's a modesty to being like, oh, I don't know why they're friends with me. I don't know why they're with me. But it's kind of ridiculous. You would have to be able to sit down and think for a second about the reason that someone is friends with you, the reason that somebody loves you. And if you can't come up with any reasons, that's genuinely a problem, because then you're always going to feel they could always leave me for someone better, for someone different, for someone who has all these qualities that I don't have, that I'm jealous of, that I wish I were more like, and that's going to forever poison your relationships with other people. And it's not uncommon to have that feeling. So just first of all, a lot of this is probably not your fault. A lot of this is how you were treated as a kid, maybe made to feel like you never measured up. Maybe when things went wrong, it was always your fault. So if you internalize things like that, then of course you start to feel like, why are people in my life? Eventually the people in my life are going to leave. And then obviously that, like I said, poisons everything from there on out, because no one really wants to be with someone who doesn't understand their own worth. Like, we obviously don't want to be with people who are narcissistic or who like overinflate their worth. We don't want people who are egotistical, but we do want people who are at least comfortable enough to know that they are, that they don't need to be constantly reminded of their worth. That is something that gets very tiresome. I think it's something that gets represented weirdly in romance novels all the time, where it's like, the female character doesn't know she's beautiful or whatever, that I think doesn't always make sense. It is important for us to believe that, what we bring to a friendship is that we are, XYZ, that we are reliable, that we are caring and compassionate, that people can rely on us. This is stuff that like you want to believe about yourself, that you can believe about yourself, that you should give value to. I also think that part of it is understanding friendships and relationships not as, you're not a list of attributes. One of the biggest problems with the not like other girls archetype, which is something that we've talked about before, where the main female character is like stronger or better than the others, or constantly compared to the others. I think that creates this feeling in us that we have to win. We have to win at romance, win at friendship, win at life. We have to be the better woman, when we are not lists of attributes. We are people, and what we bring to a relationship is more than the skills we have, or the things we possess, or the people that we know, or that we must be different in some weirdly prescribed way, like the heroine who eats anything she wants to and never gains weight, right? Or people who look a certain way. Whatever it is you feel jealous of, you never really know another person's experience. This is the problem with envy, is that you're just kind of projecting onto people what you wish you had. And you don't actually know how much of it how they feel about it. This is one way to look at it. So number one is you need to accept yourself. You need to be aware of what's valuable about you. And it doesn't hurt to actually be able to list those things off to yourself, or to just think to yourself, what do I bring to a friendship? What do I bring to a relationship? Your parents or whoever may not have made you feel from the beginning of your life that you are inherently worthy of love, but you are. I think it's really important to be able to kind of build yourself up. This is one of those coping mechanisms. It's a self-soothing mechanism. You want to remind yourself of your value. If it's not enough to just think to yourself, I exist, I am worthy, I am allowed to give myself a break, I am allowed to feel okay with who I am. If that's not enough, then yeah, you need to spend some time thinking about, what do I bring to other people's lives? What's good about me? I think you should be able to answer that question. And then the second thing would be, envy is, comparison is the thief of joy. It really is, because you do not know other people's experiences. Everyone that you are jealous of has pains of their own. The thing I always say is, nobody knows how the shoe fits except the person wearing it. You do not know what it feels like to be the people you are jealous of. In general, you never know other people's experiences. You don't know how the shoe fits unless you're the person wearing it. So envy is really a waste of your time, because it's always something. Every single person has some sort of anxiety, and just because someone has something you don't have doesn't mean that they value it the same way you value it. You may very well have something that they value more than whatever it is they have. And so that is sort of another thing to keep in mind, is that the existential difficulty of being human is that you may never be satisfied with your experience unless you choose satisfaction, unless you choose acceptance, and you choose sort of to be at peace with who you are. It's not to say there's no room for improvement. You could always work on things about yourself. You can learn new things. You can gain new skills. Whatever it is, you can definitely do those things. Life is long. You can become the person that you want to be. But also, you are inherently worthy as it is, and you don't want to be someone else because they have different problems. They have something else that you can't even begin to know about. So you can try to be a better version of you, but you can only always be you. So you have to love who that is. That person is in your life forever. That's you. You're walking around in this mortal cage, and you can't exist in another one, nor would you really want to. I think if you really got to see the inside of someone else's psyche, I think you would notice that their experience is just as uncomfortable as yours. No matter what, this is always true. We can never know other people's experiences. So there's my sort of two-step process for working with this. But this is not something that you will fix overnight. This is not something where you will make a list about yourself and suddenly it's gone. This is something you will struggle with forever. We all have things we will battle forever because it's who we are, and we are constantly trying to overcome our inner demons that are just going to follow us around because that's who we are. But knowing that you're thinking about it, that you're aware of it, that you maybe learn to check yourself when you think, oh, I wish I had that. And then you think they probably wish they had something that I have. Or, that I feel lucky, I feel loved, that you can sort of always bring it back to this reminder that what I have is valuable, who I am is valuable. That's the kind of exercise that you want to be able to do. Eventually it won't feel like so much work, and it'll just feel natural to remember, oh yeah, actually, I don't have it that bad. Hi, how do you deal with having feelings for someone who's in a committed relationship? I know it sounds bad and I feel horrible, but whenever I see this guy, we're in the same group and his girlfriend doesn't come along, I have these butterflies in my chest. If you could give me some advice, it would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so after you sent me this, I was working out with my husband. He's making me work on my lower back. And I told him, I was like, there's never really a good answer for this because there are love stories that start with, oh, I was with someone else first and then I met this person and it changed everything. That does happen. It happens infrequently, so it's kind of hard to give advice, right? I don't know the situation. I don't know. So my take on it was, I don't know that you ever want to do anything about this because the possibilities of bad outcomes are so numerous. Say in your best case scenario, I don't know what your best case scenario is, but certainly a possible scenario is that he's like, okay, cool, and dumps his girlfriend and dates you. And then you constantly will have this in the back of your head that that's the kind of guy he is and that this could happen to you. I mean, I don't know if you'll live with that in the back of your head, but I certainly would. A guy who could bail on the person he's with and immediately sort of jump into something with you is like, I don't know that you want that. Because usually, and I hate to say this, but I will always say it, none of us are ever so different that a guy who's willing to treat one woman badly isn't also willing to treat us badly. This is something I feel like I always sort of have to talk about. This is like when people sort of end up with a guy who cheated on their girlfriend with them, he ends up cheating on them as well. Because it sort of proves more of a pattern about how some men see women and not how they see you as an individual. So I always feel a little worried about liking someone who has a girlfriend. I always feel a little bit like it's not going to work out. My husband's take on this was, or why don't you just tell him there's nothing to lose? And I was like, I mean, I guess not. So what I'm saying is, I don't know that there is a right way to go about things. I know that there are wrong ways, so I'm going to tell you the wrong ways. One of the first things is that we often fall in love with the idea of someone or the fantasy of someone. And what you like about this person might be a fantasy you've created, in which case there's so many things going on in my head. So I'm the kind of person who falls in love easily. Like, I like have crushes on like so many people. I feel like this is a type of experience. There are people who have a hard time liking someone, or like, they really have to get close to someone. I think Mr. Blake is like that, where he likes someone and then he likes them so much, it's only them, that's it. I have crushes all the time on people so easily. Anyone, like we have like one good conversation and I'm like in love for 5 minutes, That doesn't mean that I always act on it. I never act on it. I'm very happily married. But I do feel, that rush of, oh my gosh, the chemistry with this person is so good, or like the conversation is so good, the banter is so good, that like temporarily I'm in love. Like a weird form of love, but it happens. I have like tiny love affairs all the time. And I think that if you're that kind of person, then you definitely really want to be aware that you're not falling for something that you created in your imagination. You're not falling for the feeling that you gave yourself of like, oh, I really enjoyed this little back and forth that we had. We get along really well. And now all of a sudden I feel butterflies. Butterflies are super easy to have is the thing. Like, they're hard to ignore because it feels so good. It's sort of like the adrenaline rush. It's the adrenaline part of love, which is unfortunately the easy part. The hard part of love is really the actually knowing someone, knowing their ins and outs, being with someone long enough to find out all of their flaws. This is why before Mr. Blake, all of my relationships were less than 30 days, because it takes me about 30 days to kind of weed out what's wrong with them. And so usually at that point, I would realize like, oops, I didn't notice that this person had all these qualities that I find annoying. I mean, it takes a long time to really see what someone is really like. You have to get in a fight with them, like a real fight, not a physical fight, but you have to really fight with someone to know what they're like when they're angry. And that might take a while. You have to see what someone is like when they're grieving, when they're really stressed, when they're under a lot of anxiety. When the worst parts of a person come out, it can take a long time. My theory is that on average, it takes 1.5 years before you really see your significant other break down in some major way. And that's when you really see the worst of who they are. And love is still loving the worst of them. And that is much harder. That's a much bigger ask than it sounds like. It sounds really simple to be like, yeah, you love someone for their weaknesses, you love them for their flaws, you love them for their vulnerabilities. But the truth is that you have to love them through the moments that you don't love them. You have to love them through the moments where you don't like them, where they don't like themselves either. And getting to that point, that is the truth of a relationship. So the fact that you're on the outside of this person, of this person's life, your friends, you run in the same friend group, that's fine. But my friends don't have any idea what I'm like at my absolute worst. Only Mr. Blake has ever seen that, because he's physically here to see just the absolute monstrosities of who I am. The truly like disgusting, gruesome parts of me, the most ugly, vulnerable, like only he has ever seen that. Only he will ever see that. Only he knows who I am as a sum of literally all of my parts, because he has been there for the best of me and the ugliest, worst of me. And so only he really knows who I am. We were actually talking about this because I'm trying to think of godparents as in like, in terms of if I died, who would I want to tell my kid about who I was? And when Mr. Blake and I were having this conversation, we realized that only he and I could ever explain to our kid what either of us was like, because only the two of us really know all those little pieces. The reason I say this is because you don't want to create some rich inner fantasy about this guy where you have given him qualities that he doesn't actually have, or that you're assuming that he only has the qualities that you've seen. If you find, I wrote some things down. If you find no flaw with him, you do not know him. You don't really know him. Everybody has flaws. And I'm not saying cute flaws. I'm not saying flaws that he would admit to you, because those things are not real flaws. I'm talking about the stuff that is just like you don't want to ever see, and that you would see because That's what it is to coexist with other people. And what you don't know about him, his girlfriend probably does, maybe does. So, one of the number one things is don't look for ways that you're better than his girlfriend. Even if for some reason he talks about his relationship with you, I think that's always a red flag. I think that is a lack of respect in the relationship. So that's just one other thing. But don't look for ways that you're better than his girlfriend. Don't look for flaws in his relationship. Don't look for reasons that he might like you more, because that helps you create this like fake alternate fantasy of him. And especially if he feeds into it, that might just be because he knows that you like him and he likes that attention. You kind of can never dismiss the possibility that someone just likes to be liked, but that doesn't mean they're going to leave their significant other. And if he gives you indications that he will, you'll have to read that for yourself, how sincere you think that is. Sometimes this is just a learning process. Sometimes you have to go through this to really realize the kinds of like patterns that people go through, because it is really hard to dismiss the ego of knowing someone has feelings for you, because then that person is always sort of reassuring to you. That person is always on your side. They always believe the best in you, whereas your significant other knows who you really are, and so maybe they don't act like that. And so sometimes people will complain because they know you'll build them back up, and sometimes you just end up being like a tool in their own narcissism. So yeah, if you do decide to tell him how you feel, I think that you do that if you want. It doesn't really, this is your choice, whatever you want to come out of this. If it makes you feel better to have the closure of just saying it, that's fine. But if he spends more time with you after you confess this, I think that's a warning sign. I think that means that he's disrespectful of his girlfriend. That's not something you want for yourself. How he treats his girlfriend is how he would treat you, essentially. This is not really about the girlfriend's personality, what she's like. This is about what he's like. The way he treats her is essentially the way he would treat you. Just don't allow yourself to live in a fantasy. Don't allow yourself to give him positive attributes that he doesn't really have, or to imagine that he feels a certain way, or to imagine that she is a certain way, because you don't know her either. Not in the way that he knows her. You don't know the inside of their relationship. None of that is really advice, I guess, because this is just one of those sticky situations where sometimes it will, because sometimes you hypothetically end up with him hypothetically, and it's fine and it's great and there's nothing to worry about, and it's just a matter of he had met someone else first and the timing was bad. But I think you do want to look out for the red flags, your own red flags of imagining things, or maybe how it makes you feel to be close to him. Does it feel wrong, like in an exciting way? Because that will fade if he leaves his girlfriend for you. It will no longer be exciting. So it depends what those butterflies are. If it's just because he's difficult, because you can't have him, if you like him because he's unavailable, that really says a lot more about you than it does about him, and you need to kind of look at that. That is definitely a thing. People who are unavailable will be more attractive to us because the challenge is the exciting part. And you can know that about yourself and ignore it, I think, and learn to ignore it. But if you really just really like this guy and I don't know how real that is. I'm not going to make any judgments about that. And you want to tell him how you feel. And he says, okay, well, I'm not ready. I need to think about this and deal with my current relationship. I have to, I'm not in a place where then that happens. And sometimes it'll work out and sometimes it won't. And either way, you learn from it. It's just like one of those things that you do. And it's a weird, sticky situation. I find that there are very few ways to win. I don't know what winning even looks like. I think that sort of spinning out the fantasy to think of what is your dream scenario, and then kind of look at that and think, is it about winning him? Is it about, having some person who has his qualities, but not necessarily him? Is it just about the fact that you feel butterflies? I think you need to just look at that, think of what your reasons are for liking him. And again, if you can't come up with anything wrong with him, you don't actually know him. So sometimes getting to know someone really well is a great way to no longer have a crush on them. Anyway, I've been going on for a really long time, but so one of the other questions was, why are friend breakups worse than romantic breakups? And while the only thing that cures grief is time, we can talk about how to get through that next week if no one has any other questions. But anyway, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.